he has done his MD Pathology in the year 1982, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. And after that, he joined Medical Education Service of Kerala government in the year 1983, has served as a lecturer, assistant professor, associate professor, and professor in various medical colleges under the government. A major part of his career was spent in Calicut Medical College for a long 27 years, also served for 3 years in Allapuja Medical College and 1 year in Thrissur Medical College. And now coming to his non-career activities, we can see that he has been active member of Kerala Shastra Sahitya Parishad, KSSP, a people science movement, KSSP president. He was the president of KSSP for the years 2015 to 2017, was a core member of KSSP's Health and Development Studies in the year 1987, 1996, and Kerala Padanam 2004 and 2019. Like we have seen his YouTube videos and we can see him on national TV and other channels regarding this work. Then he's a convener of the Darwin Biometry celebrations and series of popular science classes on evolution. He has given lectures in Malayalam on health and popular science on behalf of KSSP. And he is author of several popular science books in Malayalam on behalf of KSSP. Now, admiring his devoted work, continuous hard work, he has been awarded with various awards. But out of it, I would like to mention here two most important awards, which are Basu Malik Award for the best research work in the year 1996 by the Indian Association of Pathologists and Microbiologists for the work on acute appendicitis. Then the second award which I would like to mention here is Kerala Government Special Award for implementing comprehensive care program for patients with sickle cell anemia in the year 2011. So these are the awards, and there are so many awards which I'm not going to mention now, but he has been honored with so many awards, and he is a very well-known personality. So, and the interests and hobbies which Dr. KP Arvindan holds or have are evolutionary biology. He is interested in the field of evolutionary biology. And then the second is method of science. Then the third is people science movements, in which he has done a lot of work. And then on the on ecology, he has done his work. And everyone knows that we all love movies, and he is also fond of old Hindi film music. And so we would be glad to hear you, sir. I hereby request you to start your speech, sir.
Thank you very much. First of all, I salute the great visionary, Dr. Narendra Dabholkar, and the organization, Maharashtra Andhashraddha Nirmoolan Samiti. I also bring fraternal greetings from Kerala Shastra Sahitya Parishad, which is a member of the All India People's Science Network. I think I'll go to share the screen and give a presentation. Kerala Shastra Sahitya Parishad, or KSSP, is what we like to call as a people's science movement. The main aims being propagation of science and promotion of scientific thinking, and we work in different areas like education, health, environment, and gender and social justice through various methods like publications, cultural interventions. But KSSP Kala Jatha street theater is quite famous, and we have done this show in many parts of India also. And of course, the activist activities. And the motto of the organization is Science for Social Revolution. We publish several publications, apart from many books in Malayalam. and three magazines and one online magazine called Luca. First and foremost, we think of science, as Carl Sagan said, science as a candle in the dark to light up our path and clear the way for knowledge. Now, what makes human beings different from other animals? If you look at human beings, you see continuous change through the periods as shown. And if we simultaneously look at all these periods, a group of chimpanzees, you would see that they have remained virtually unchanged through time. Of course, through very large amounts of time, physical evolution takes place. I'm not talking about that. And this is primarily because of transmitted knowledge, or what we call as culture. And as far as human beings are concerned, we now think of this beginning of evolution of the brain, particularly with upright posture and the use of tools. And tool use led to better knowledge, which in turn led to better tools, and so on. And physically also, finer tool making and finer use of tools needed better use of the brain power, and those that had better representation or better brain power to do that were favored in natural selection. And this was a long process through which human brain became bigger and more diverse in its function. And when we talk of transmitted knowledge, primarily you can divide it into two broad categories. One, the knowledge that is derived from belief which is derived from authority, and empirical knowledge, which is gained from observation and experimenting by doing. And this is derived from evidence. Now, you can see throughout history that evidence-based thinkers, whether it was Galileo, Copernicus, Charles Darwin, that is Charles Darwin in his young days, or Vesalius, or even Indian thinkers like Indian physicians, and even scientists like Brahmagupta, according to some historical accounts, had to challenge authority of the day and had to prevail their thoughts, which was based on evidence. Now, which is the most valid knowledge of all these? If you look at that, various types of knowledge are available to us from religious texts or ancestors' tales or eyewitness accounts, folk knowledge, history, epics, and science. There's no doubt that science has more validity in its knowledge. It tends to be more likely to be true than any other. Now, this is primarily because of the method of science. The method, science is nothing but, basically, it boils down to a way of thinking, basically. Not the high technologies and all other things, which are all the result. But it is fundamentally, it is a way of thinking. A way of thinking which we can I'm simplifying it very much. If you start with a hypothesis, you think that, okay, when you talk about nature, you make a hypothesis, and this is likely to be like this. And then you test that hypothesis. And something that is wrong is discarded, and one that proves to be right is chosen. And this leads to a new hypothesis, which is again tested, again the right one chosen, and so on. Now, it's not always that scientists will always be right, and scientists will not always. It is not that always they choose the right one and not the wrong one. It's not like that. But over a period of time, this is the process that goes on and on and on, and this is the basic scientific method. So anything that is proved to be wrong consistently is never retained. Whoever be the authority who says this, it is mercilessly discarded and a new alternate hypothesis chosen. That is the fundamental difference of science, the scientific method, from all others. And I won't go into the details of this. There are many features of the scientific method. The philosophers of science, or the people who think about how scientists arrive at their conclusions, they have come up with various, like Karl Popper and Thomas Kuhn and so on. And these are the ones: empiricism, by doing, basically gaining knowledge by doing, or predictability, repeatability, falsifiability, very important a criterion put forward by Karl Popper, interrelatedness. And science is again an open enterprise in which there is always questioning and revision. And the scientific revolution actually was aided. If you look at history, there was a period which in Europe primarily, there was a period of huge explosion in this method of reasoning and method of science. And this explosion, two things that aided this explosion was, one is the printing press, and the other, like what Galileo, his dialogues book was written in Italian, use of the vernacular languages. So this led to a democratization of knowledge, and more people could take part in this enterprise called science. And in other ways, it also led to these changes also spurred on the feeling, the need for equality and democracy, and led to the French Revolution and so many other changes in the modern world. In other words, you can say that this scientific revolution gave birth to the modern world. And just look at, when we talk of the modern world and the scientific revolution, the rapid change that occurred. See, for 5,000 years or more, the fastest mode of transport was the horse-driven vehicles, chariots and other ones. And then came the steam engine and the diesel engine and the aircrafts and jets and space travel. And look at how this is from 20 kilometers an hour, we can now travel 64,000 kilometers or even more per hour, is the speed that the human beings have achieved during a very short span of time. From fire being the sole source of energy, the main source of energy that we could harness, now we have ever so many different sources of energy that is available to us, which we use in multiple ways. And look at the world population growth rate. This is a graph of the world population. And you can see that it is more or less steady from 1000 AD onwards. It goes on steady, more or less till the 18th century or 19th century. And somewhere in the 19th century onwards, timing with the scientific revolution, or the after effects of the scientific revolution, I would say, it just goes up, shoots up. And because of the great fall in the deaths, that is the primary reason for this population growth rate increasing. And what it has led to, this enterprise called science, this way of thinking has actually led to our modern world, the high, fantastic technologies that we employ today. Now, everybody knows that we take all these for granted. Everyone talks of the RT-PCR test now, but the fundamental test or the technologies that have led to the RT-PCR test, a simple test like RT-PCR test, it has a long history, a history of multiple advances, multiple scientific discoveries have resulted in this kind of things. Our simple mobile, a smartphone, is such a wondrous instrument which everyone takes for granted. All of us use it. But just imagine the number of scientific discoveries and things have actually literally hundreds and hundreds of various branches of science, various kinds of scientific discoveries have all gone into the making of this wonder called a smartphone. But the fruits of this, the world, the current modern world, if you take at the modern world, it is fundamentally two different worlds. One world enjoys all these fruits of all these scientific discoveries are enjoyed by a group of people. But this is more or less in various degrees. This is denied to a very, very large number of people, even today. It is estimated that 1% of the population, world population, has about 46% of the world's wealth. And as this cartoon says, it seems it's still not enough, and they still ask for more and more in terms of tax cuts and various other things. Even the most wondrous medical achievements have now been able, because of these medical achievements, even the most incurable of diseases, including many cancers, can now be cured. But the cost of this is unaffordable even to the middle class people in many, many parts of the world. And there are huge number of social disparities, not merely economic disparities, and particularly in a country like India. I would say, most importantly, a country like India. Built upon the economic disparities, we also have social disparities, caste and gender being two very important among them. And various kinds of divisions, vast parts of the country are still so many years, 75 years into independence. Many parts of the country are still suffering from large-scale poverty. So essentially, science can indeed change the world. There is no doubt about that. It has changed the world. But the fruits of science are not available to all. That is a very sad truth of the day. And there is the relevance of what we think the KSSP motto is, science for social revolution. Because we believe that science can also aid in changing the societies, not merely changing the world, not merely making new discoveries, new technologies, but also change the way societies are structured so that the fruits of science are available to everyone. Now I will end the last part of this talk. I will just say a few things about science in India. India has a glorious past, no doubt. When we think of ancient science, there was a time when we were at par with the great civilizations in which science, the proto-science, or not the modern science, but the foundational start of scientific enterprise began, like Greece or China. India definitely had a place in that. But somewhere along the line, we seem to have lost our way. And in today's India, side by side with great advancements in modern science, we also have all the medieval or even ancient throwbacks of superstition and false beliefs along with the scientific advances. Now, if you ask somebody, this is I show this picture sometimes to students and ask them that this is some great discovery is there in this picture, Indian, or it is a symbol of Indian science, ancient Indian science. And unfortunately, it's not merely the students who get it wrong, sometimes, but even the Prime Minister of the country thinks that that picture is possibly the Ganesha's head being made by or fixed there by a plastic surgeon, as he said in a speech, and as Dr. Mohali mentioned this in his speech. He is right in one half, because plastic surgery definitely was an Indian contribution, but that is not for Ganesha's head. It is mentioned in ancient Indian texts, for the removal, the replacing the cut nose, like the operation now called rhinoplasty. This was done in India at a time when nobody was even thinking of doing such surgeries. So this is not the picture. And as far as this picture is concerned, the actual science here is the ink that is used. This is a picture made with ink, and this type of ink, the Indian ink, was used in India even as far back as 3rd century BC. And even in our premier scientific bodies, there are people who are encouraged to present totally unscientific pseudoscience, like the Vaimanika Shastra, stem cell technology in Mahabharata, and so on, and absolutely stupid, I would say. And the sad part of it is that much of this is officially encouraged. At the time of COVID, when science has done a yeoman job actually in coming up with vaccines, in coming up with various, as the previous speaker was speaking about, we have come out with data, the understanding of the disease, understanding of the virus, understanding knowing the sequence of the viral genome, the variants of the virus, and the tests that are developed for the virus. Though not a direct drug, but many drugs that can save lives. The use of oxygen, detecting when the oxygen is low, and ever so many things apart from vaccines. And this has been done by two things. One, an unprecedented type of international cooperation among the scientists. And second, that many of the countries realize that only science can save lives at this point. And they spent a lot of money, encourage even a person like Donald Trump, who is fundamentally anti-science person, even he liberally granted funds for vaccine development and other in the United States. But see what, this is India. Absolutely untested, untried, unscientific drug called Coronil is being launched by a charlatan, I would say. And the sad part of it is he's flanked by 2 union cabinet ministers. Official encouragement of such thought. That is the unfortunate thing about today's India. In the 75th year of independence, we have to really think of the intellectual backwardness to which this country is heading. Absolutely anti-intellectualism is gaining ground, and that is being propagated. And at a time when India is falling behind countries like China, primarily because the plan expenditure, if you see, it is hardly even today for science and technology, we spent less than 2% of the GDP on that. And 40% of Indian-born researchers are either working overseas, large diaspora of any 16 countries in a survey of researchers, 40%. And many of other great Indian scientists, they have made all their achievements abroad, and Nobel laureates have got that by working abroad, not in India. And one of the reasons, apart from the money, one of the reasons which particularly is becoming more and more, the situation is becoming more and more bad, is the absence of a scientific temperament. In publications, scientific publications, we are nowhere near countries like US, despite having a second largest population in the world. We are nowhere near China or United States, or even many other European countries. If you look at the impact factor, which is a far more important thing, we are even further behind and much lower in world average. The workforce in science, again, a very low number of people actually work in science. So this is the current situation from which we have to come out. And this is the most important thing on this when we talk of the scientific temper for independence. And there was a time when, along with independence, there were great thinkers and leaders like Ambedkar and Nehru, who valued a scientific way of thinking above everything else. And they thought that this is the way forward for India to become, to actually break all the shackles in which we were tied, to break free and become a very modern nation. Unfortunately, and we were on a path towards that, even though slowly, we were on that path. Unfortunately, in recent years, there has been a reversal. So I will end this talk here by thanking the martyrs of science and rationalism and thanking all of you for patient listening. Thank you.